Hello and welcome. I figured what better topic to start with on our extended break than viruses, the whole reason we have this break. You can see here, virus picture, somebody's animation of the coronavirus that's going around. So this little video, hoping not to exceed 12 minutes, will give you kind of an introductory explanation, some background, some basic facts on viruses. So what is a virus? It's the first thing I want to deal with. What is the virus? The definition for a virus. Definition I like summarizing a virus in 3 words. It's an acellular, intracellular parasite. Those 3 words sum up a virus very nicely. The first aspect, the first part, the acellular part. Acellular, remember, the A before a word negates it, or if it starts with an A, the AN prefix will negate the word. So acellular simply means that a virus doesn't have a cell, it exists without a cell. And that's the basis for scientists classifying viruses as non-living. So they don't have a cell, they are seen as non-living. They also don't do a number of things that living cells, living organisms do. But that's a big one. Remember, the cell is the basic structure and function of all living things. Viruses don't have a cell, so they're considered not living. The second part, intracellular, kind of goes with the parasite. Intracellular just means within a cell, and that's where they're going to exist when they're parasites. So they're going to live within that cell, and they're going to hurt the host cell, hurt the host organism cell. So again, an acellular, intracellular parasite. They're cellularless, and they are going to enter and reside inside the cell, and then be released from the cell. So this definition is slightly different than what you find in your book, but I like it. So what makes up a virus? So on the bottom of this page, you'll see a bunch of different viruses and virus types. Viruses have, all viruses really have 2 main parts. There's a third part that some have. The 2 main parts are a capsid, and that's simply a protein coating that surrounds the virus, its outer shell. And inside that capsid is the nucleic acid. And what's interesting about viruses is that viruses can contain, their nucleic acid will contain DNA or RNA. And what is different about viruses than other living things is that this DNA that is in there may be double-stranded or single-stranded. And same with the RNA. The RNA can be double-stranded or single-stranded. And if you remember from early on in the year, DNA characteristic of it was it's double-stranded, and RNA is single-stranded. So it's unusual, if you look at the course spectrum of living things, to find anything quite like a virus. I mean, even though it's not living, but just anything. So it has these components that are unusual, the single-stranded DNA and the double-stranded RNA. Some viruses also contain kind of a membrane. I may mention this later, but dengue fever virus, as it leaves the cell, leaves through the cell membrane. As it leaves through the cell membrane, it gets covered and coated in the cellular. It takes part of the membrane with it. And when you can see, the rabies virus and the flu virus have these red pieces on them. Viruses are also coated in other molecules like glycoproteins, which are a combination of a carbohydrate and a protein, and these will often help them enter the cell or gain access, allow the nucleic acid to gain access to the cell. Viruses come in all different shapes and sizes, from the kind of small, circular kind of way of thinking of it to this kind of snake-like structure. The alien kind of looking ones, the T4 phage, which is not on this picture, is it's probably kind of the classic looking one. The tobacco mosaic virus, it's like a long column. But regardless of their shape or nucleic acid composition. They all really do one thing. Right? They infect cells. But one really important aspect of this infection is that viruses are limited. There's a limitation within viruses. Viruses can only infect specific cell types. So this coronavirus that's going around only infects respiratory cells in the respiratory tract, maybe the lungs. It is not able to really infect nerve cells or destroy nerve cells or muscle cells. It's really limited to that aspect. And it can still be deadly. I mean, if you lose your lung capacity, you're going to die, but that is a limitation of viruses. Most viruses you have, they're limited to their cell type and then limited to the range in which they can affect. Rabies, which I'll mention, have another talk on maybe tomorrow, infects only nerve cells, mainly nerve cells. And then there's a special term you'll see is a phage. Phages are viruses that only infect bacteria cells, and they're around. If they encounter you, they can't gain access to your cells and are just around. But you'll see that term in various places. But anything with a phage infects bacteria cells. That leads to the other aspect. Questions that often come up are viruses and pets or animals, or if you have a pet plant. Viruses typically cannot infect pets, right? And pets, if they get sick, they can't infect you. There occasionally can be mutations which cause the virus to be able to gain access to your cells, but typically there's no worry. If you're sick, you're not going to be contagious to your pet, and if your pet's sick, it almost certainly won't be contagious to you. And same goes with any kind of pet plant that you may have laying around. It's not going to get infected from you, so don't worry there. If your plant dies, it's because you didn't water it or something. So with viruses, they have really, they don't eat. They don't produce energy. All they do is one thing, and that is just their whole main existence is to reproduce. And they do this really through two ways. In viruses, again, I want to say they're not considered living in the energy use, energy requirement, and all they do is reproduce. And there are two modes for reproduction. One's the lytic cycle and the lysogenic cycle. These are the two big cycles that are talked about with viruses. And I'm going to finish with going over these two processes. So first, the lytic cycle, which is the one that really all viruses end up going through. But lytic, if you remember from earlier in the year, the lysosome, and destroys the digestive organelle, degrading and destroying macromolecules, those carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids. And the root of lysosome is lysis. Same with the lytic cycle, is lysis, which is the Greek, Latin for unbound, loosening, and in this case, kind of loosening of the cell and kind of breaking open the cell, and this kind of cellular destruction ultimately is what it's going to refer to. All right, so how viruses do this, the first thing they do is they attach to the cell membrane. They use those pieces on the outside to attach to some sort of part of the cell membrane, and then using either their own machinery or the cell, some exploit in the cell membrane, they then inject their nucleic acid into the cell. Once the nucleic acid is in the cell, it really kind of takes over. It stops the normal functioning of the cell, hijacks the cellular machinery, and it causes the cell to stop whatever task it's doing and to then continually make viruses. And that's all the cell will do at that point, is make new viruses. The cell fills up with viruses and grows in sizes and swells, and will do this until ultimately it explodes. Here are some electron micrograph pictures that I found of cells that are going through lysis or the Leydig cycle. You can see the cell kind of membrane that was here. It's being destroyed, and these viruses are now being released into the surroundings. Same down here. It's the cell is completely open, and the viruses are now leaking out, going off to infect other cells. And this is a nice picture. I'm not sure what virus this is, but it could be that some viruses, like dengue fever, they go through the Leydig cycle. They don't fill and swell. They actually escape the cell before it kind of fills and bursts. But they do continually go through the cell membrane, which I believe weakens the membrane, can lead to cellular destruction that way, or just the stopping of the normal cellular function can cause it to go down as well. And finally, with the lysogenic cycle. So we're the same beginning. Virus attaches to the surface of the cell. Same thing, and injects the nucleic acid into the cell. The difference here is once the nucleic acid gets into the cell, it copies itself into the cell's DNA. So instead of immediately taking over the cell with the lysogenic cycle, the nucleic acid is copied. This DNA, or potentially RNA, which can be converted into DNA, is copied and put into the cell's own DNA, where it lays there dormant for any period of time. So the viral DNA is copied, put into the cell's DNA, and just sits there waiting for some sort of trigger, some sort of outside stimulus to activate it. And once it's activated, and it could be a few days, could be a few years, could be many, many years. Once it gets activated, though, it enters the Leydig cycle, and then we have the viruses reproducing within the cell until the cellular explosion, and then the cell releases viruses, and those viruses then can go infect other cells, and on and on. Well, that's it for this video. I hope you subscribe. Let's get this to 1 million views. And stay safe, stay strong, and I'll see you later.